It's one of those moments you just can't believe. Imagine sitting in a courtroom, watching a police officer, someone who's supposed to protect and serve, openly insult a black woman, completely disrespecting her. But what's even more unbelievable, this woman, instead of backing down, does something no one saw coming. She turns the tables in a way that leaves everyone stunned. In this shocking story, we're diving deep into an unexpected turn of events. The officer, with his years of authority and power, seems to think he can get away with anything. But this woman isn't just any bystander. She's been through too much to let him get away with his behavior. Her response, it's not just about defending herself, it's about standing up for a whole community that's been overlooked for far too long. But here's where it gets crazy. The woman's actions lead to a twist that no one saw coming. After everything, she ends up doing something that lands the officer behind bars. Wait, what? How did it happen? And why did this officer's attitude come back to bite him so hard? You'll want to stick around for the next part, because the full story isn't just about a confrontation in a courtroom. It's about power, justice, and the fight for respect. To understand how this all started, you need to know a little bit about both of the key players in this story. The police officer, Officer Harris, had been with the force for nearly 2 decades. With that much time on the job, he'd grown used to the respect that came with his badge. But over the years, he also picked up an attitude, a belief that his authority could never be questioned, that he was untouchable. His reputation had earned him some enemies, but also allies who would cover for him when he stepped out of line. He had a way of bending the rules without facing consequences. Then there was Maria, the woman at the center of this story. She wasn't just some random person caught in a legal mess. She was a community advocate, someone who'd fought for years to bring attention to the systemic issues that affected her neighborhood. Maria was no stranger to injustice. She'd lived through it. She'd seen how the system worked against people who looked like her. But despite all that, she kept pushing forward, speaking out, and standing up for what was right. Her voice had power, and she wasn't afraid to use it. It was in a small courtroom, with tensions already high, that the real drama unfolded. Officer Harris, trying to flex his authority, began taunting Maria in a way that no one expected. His words were laced with disdain, an obvious attempt to humiliate her. The crowd fell silent, unsure of how to react. But Maria wasn't just going to sit there. What happened next would shake everything up in a way no one saw coming. As Officer Harris threw his words at Maria, the courtroom seemed to freeze. It was almost as if everyone was holding their breath, unsure of what would happen next. His voice was dripping with arrogance, each word designed to break her down. He'd crossed a line. But the thing about Maria was that she wasn't intimidated. She'd been through too much to let a man like him silence her. Maria's face stayed calm, but inside, her heart was racing. She knew what was at stake, not just for herself, but for the countless people who were watching. This wasn't just a personal battle. It was bigger than that. It was a fight for dignity, for fairness, for a system that had repeatedly failed people like her. She had no intention of backing down, even though she knew the odds were stacked against her. Across the room, some of the witnesses were starting to murmur, uncomfortable with the way Harris was pushing Maria. One of them, a young man named Malik, who had grown up in the same community as Maria, leaned forward in his seat, his eyes narrowing. He had seen Harris' behavior before, always belittling people who didn't have the power to fight back. He clenched his fists, knowing something had to be done. But what could he do in a courtroom full of strangers? Maria's lawyer, a middle-aged woman named Evelyn, watched the exchange closely. She had seen plenty of confrontations in her career, but there was something different about this one. Evelyn knew Harris wasn't just trying to win a case. He was trying to prove something, trying to remind everyone who was in charge. And that, Evelyn realized, was the real threat. The courtroom wasn't just about justice, it was a battleground for power, and Officer Harris wasn't playing by the rules. Maria, meanwhile, could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, every whisper, every pause. She took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself. She had two choices: let Harris continue to push her into a corner, or do what she had to do to take control of the room. As the tension built, you could almost feel the moment hanging in the air, waiting for someone to make a move. What Maria did next would change everything, but no one, not even her closest allies, could have predicted the impact it would have. The silence in the courtroom felt deafening now. Harris, still smirking, leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as if daring Maria to say something back. He knew he had the power here, and he wasn't about to let her forget it. He was used to people backing down when he stepped up to the plate, used to the way his badge made him untouchable in the eyes of the law. But Maria wasn't backing down. Her heart pounded, her fingers gripping the edge of the table in front of her, but there was something calm in her. She had been pushed to the limit so many times before, and now, with all the weight of injustice on her shoulders, she felt a fire she hadn't felt in years. She looked Harris dead in the eyes, and for a brief second, she saw something shift in him. His confidence wavered, just slightly, enough to give her the strength to push forward. Malik's eyes never left Maria. You could see it building inside her, that quiet strength that had carried her through so many battles. His pulse quickened as he realized what was happening. People were starting to notice the tension. He could feel the crowd shifting, their attention locked onto the showdown between the officer and the woman who refused to back down. It wasn't just about Maria anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or pushed aside. This moment had become bigger than anyone expected. Evelyn, Maria's lawyer, was starting to feel a chill in the air. She had seen cases where power struggled to maintain control, but this was different. Harris wasn't just trying to win a case. He was trying to humiliate Maria, break her spirit. And the way things were going, Evelyn feared Harris was about to cross a line that would set off an explosion no one could contain. Maria took another breath, steadying herself. The tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable now. She knew this was her moment. If she backed down, everything would be lost. She looked at the judge, who was watching quietly, the lines on his face deepening with concern. The weight of history was pressing down on everyone in the room, and Maria knew she had to make her move. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew it was now or never. Then, without warning, she stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor echoed like a warning bell. The room seemed to collectively inhale. Harris straightened, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Maria's voice was steady, clear, unwavering as she addressed the judge. But the words she was about to say would cut deeper than anyone could anticipate. The question was, would they be enough to stop Officer Harris, or would it all spiral out of control? Maria's voice broke the silence, steady yet powerful. "Your Honor," she said, her words cutting through the tension, "I don't need your sympathy, and I don't need your respect. But what I do need is for this courtroom to see the truth." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Everyone in the room was watching her now. This was no longer just about her. It was about something much larger. The stakes had never been higher. Officer Harris, standing a few feet away, narrowed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, his control was slipping. He hadn't expected her to fight back so boldly. He wasn't prepared for someone to stand up to him in this way, and it shook him to his core. But just as the room seemed to brace for Maria's next move, something unexpected happened. Malik, who had been watching intently, suddenly stood up too. His face was filled with a kind of quiet anger, the kind you only see when someone has seen enough injustice to last a lifetime. "Your Honor," he said, his voice loud enough to echo off the walls, "I need to speak. This isn't just about what happened in this courtroom. It's about the pattern, the harassment, the intimidation, the lies." The room went dead silent again. Malik was stepping into territory no one had anticipated. His sudden intervention added a new layer to the conflict. Was he a witness? An ally? Or was he about to complicate everything in ways no one was ready for? Harris turned toward Malik, fury flashing across his face. He tried to shut him down, but the judge held up his hand, signaling for everyone to calm down. "I'll allow him to speak," the judge said, his voice firm but measured. The air seemed to thicken with the weight of what was coming next. Malik's eyes locked with Maria's for a moment. He had something big, something that could flip this case upside down. But would he share it? Would it be enough to take Harris down, or would it only make things worse for Maria? The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the truth to come pouring out. And just as Malik opened his mouth, the doors to the courtroom suddenly swung open, and in walked someone unexpected, a figure that none of them had seen coming. As Malik opened his mouth to speak, the doors of the courtroom swung open with a sudden force, causing everyone to turn. The figure that stepped inside was none other than Captain Reyes, the head of the police department, someone who was known to be untouchable, one of the most respected officers in the entire city. His reputation for upholding the law had been unblemished, his public persona spotless. No one had expected him to walk through those doors, especially not now. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Officer Harris' face went pale, and the room's atmosphere shifted from tense to outright electric. Malik hesitated, his words hanging in the air as Reyes took a step forward, looking directly at Harris. The power dynamic had just shifted. Reyes wasn't just some bystander. He was a force, someone who could have a significant impact on what would unfold next. "Captain Reyes," the judge said, his voice careful but curious, "is there something you'd like to add?" Reyes looked at the judge, then turned to face the courtroom. "I've been asked to look into the allegations surrounding Officer Harris," he said, his voice cold and deliberate. "It seems there's been a pattern of misconduct. We've gathered some new evidence that suggests Harris has been involved in a series of questionable activities." The room erupted into whispers. Maria, who had been bracing herself for the worst, felt her heart race. This wasn't what she had expected. She hadn't anticipated this level of intervention. Harris' face contorted with disbelief, then anger. "You can't be serious," he spat, his voice rising. "This is a setup, a personal attack. You don't know what you're talking about." Reyes remained calm. "I'm afraid it's not just speculation anymore, Harris. We've seen the evidence. The department is already taking steps to ensure accountability." Maria's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the entire system. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when the truth would finally come out. But there was one last piece to this puzzle, one final piece of the story that no one had seen coming. As Reyes spoke, a police officer entered the room, handing him an envelope. Reyes opened it, his eyes scanning the contents, his expression unreadable. He looked up, his gaze meeting Maria's, and then he turned to Harris. "It's worse than we thought. There's a witness statement that directly ties you to a series of incidents that have been covered up. This investigation is going public. Your time is up, Harris." But just as Harris looked like he was about to collapse under the weight of everything, a second officer, one who had been quietly sitting in the back of the room, stood up and walked toward the judge. His face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he held up a set of documents. "There's something else," he said, voice shaking. "I've been sitting on this for months, but it's all true. Harris isn't the only one involved. There are others in the department who've been complicit." The room fell into stunned silence again. The twist nobody expected had just turned the entire case upside down. Maria, who had been fighting for justice, now realized the fight was bigger than one officer. The corruption ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. She had taken down one monster, but now the real battle, uncovering the full extent of the systemic issues, was just beginning. Harris' face twisted in fury, his world crumbling around him. The courtroom was buzzing with the realization of how far the corruption had spread, but Maria, despite everything, felt a sense of clarity wash over her. This was only the beginning of a larger fight for justice, one that would take years, maybe decades, to fully unravel, but she was ready. As Harris was escorted out, his defiant stare was the last thing Maria saw before the doors closed behind him.